Thank you very much, John, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure that we have this opportunity to present you the Search Capacity Assessment Tool, or the SCAT. What we've seen in this pandemic is that there can be a sudden increase of infections, and that also leads to a wave of samples that need to be processed by laboratories. I am from the National Institute in the Netherlands, and we are currently experiencing our fourth wave of COVID-19 cases. And again, there is very much pressure on the laboratory to process all those samples. Well, if you look at the past year, what kind of reports we have seen from all over the world is that supply shortages negatively impacting COVID-19 testing, but not only COVID-19, but also for other diseases. That also it has been very challenging to keep and attract staff because there's also a large burden on the staff in the laboratories. We've seen that there are novel tests being developed and that they're also being used by different laboratories. And also that the differences in testing capacities between countries can have an impact on how these countries can respond to this pandemic. So what are these consequences of limited search capacity, so limited testing capacity? So first of all, very simple, is that contagious individuals are unaware they are infected. Therefore, they cannot change their behavior, and they might therefore infect more people. Also, from a response point of view, if you don't know who is infected, you can also not perform a contact tracing. And as a national institute or a government agency, limited testing capacity also results in limited knowledge on the development of the outbreak. Is it still increasing? Is it stabilizing? What is the R value at the moment? And also, if you have control measures, you want to know if those control measures are effective. And again, if there's limited testing capacity, then there's also limited knowledge if the control measures that are in place, if they are in fact effective. So what are then the consequences on laboratories? Well, severe pressure on staff may lead to health problems, and these can be physical health problems because it can be quite laborious, the laboratory processes, and also can be mental because of very long shifts and short time between shifts. There can be equipment failure due to extensive use because their occupation is very high. There is limited time for maintenance, or the maintenance schedule is not the same, is not increased with the increased use of the machine. What we also seen is that there's a strong depletion of budgets that are intended for other purposes. In our institute, we have almost stopped all our non-critical processes for over a year just to sustain the critical processes. You can have a storage problem, not only of samples coming in, but also of reagents and of consumables such as PPE. Then, of course, if you increase testing, you also increase the amount of waste that you produce. And this can lead to problems in waste management. Well, when you have so much pressure on a lab, this might also impact the quality of the work that the lab can perform. Well, with a new disease, it might be unclear or not yet known which biosafety and biosecurity issues should be in place. And also, when you, for example, take a new storage room into use, is that storage room in the same level protected as your storage room that you usually use for your laboratory? And also that there can be limited resources of staff, of equipment, of time for validation of novel tests. So in the beginning of the pandemic, there were no rapid diagnostic tests. These were developed, and as a laboratory, you might want to validate these tests, how well they perform. So most laboratories can handle pressure on one of these aspects. But if it is on multiple aspects, this pressure built up, and at some moment, the laboratory is completely overloaded. Surge capacity assessment tool and the development. So we develop it in a collaboration with laboratories in Europe and in Southeast Asia. And the aim of this tool is, what can laboratories do to become more resilient? There are supply chain problems, but this can be a problem on so many levels outside the influence of a laboratory. But what can a laboratory do itself to become more resilient? And that is, for example, that if you have your critical consumables, that you have your favorite supplier, but also a list of alternative suppliers, and that you already have identified those alternative suppliers when there is no crisis scenario in your laboratory. And also for your reagents, that you have selected your standard reagent, but also a list of alternative reagents that you can use in the laboratory. And what we also see is, what very important is, that all responsibilities are involved from the beginning of a crisis scenario. So that when you have an increase in testing, that also means an increase in reagents, and these need to be ordered, and the person responsible for that should be informed on day one. It also means more waste management, so the person responsible for waste management should also be informed. It also means that you probably need more staff, so that also means that HR should be informed. And I think that's very key, and what we learned as an institute in this pandemic is that you need to have a team that is responsible for the different aspects, and that they are all informed, and you do not try to tackle one problem at a time. So we created the tool as in Excel. So that means it can run on almost any computer. And it consists of 4 sheets in Excel. The first sheet is a cover page. The second sheet is questions. And the third sheet are the results of these questions. And then on the fourth sheet, we have the surge capacity calculator. And with this surge capacity calculator, you can calculate what is the testing capacity of your laboratory during a crisis situation, and what is the limiting factor preventing your lab to test more. So we have 40 questions on 7 different areas, and the 7 areas are the laboratory profile. So this means the infrastructure and the budget of the laboratory. And there are multiple questions for this section, and these can be scored from 1 to 4. And my colleague Vennis will show you all the details about these questions and how this works. We also have an area on equipment and technology, on staff and workforce management, on reagents and logistics, on quality assurance, test validation, and reporting and data management. So how would you implement the tool? So within Project 81, we envision that laboratories are selected by the partner countries. Then an internal or an external assessor is appointed. And this internal or external assessor then informs the laboratory and schedules a visit or schedules a day to fill out the assessment tool. So the staff who will be consulted is based on their expertise and on responsibility. So the person who's responsible for waste management, the person who's responsible for workstations in the lab, those will be informed and then asked to collect relevant documentation for the assessment. Then the assessor visits the laboratory and fills out the assessment based on the provided documentation and on the interviews with the relevant staff. and then the results are shared with the laboratory and a list of potential improvements is provided. And this goes back to the lab. And the reason we depicted this as a circle is because when you complete the first circle, you can see what you can do as a lab to make your lab more resilient. And then you can make changes, and then you can see if these changes had an effect, and you can complete this circle again. What is also possible is that you share the results within your organization, if there are multiple laboratories in your organization, and can also be shared with the national government so that they have an overview of what level of preparedness is present in the laboratories. So what is then the implication of the results? Well, for the laboratories, one of the outcomes, potential outcomes, might be that the calculated 24-hour search capacity, so that means is the testing capacity that you can scale up to as a laboratory within 24 hours, is insufficient for a pandemic. And a consequence might be that a laboratory might consider an improvement program to meet capacity requirements. And these can be their internal capacity requirements, but also capacity requirements from national government. A potential outcome might be identified gaps in awareness of safe and secure laboratory practices. And the lab might decide to develop a new training program for laboratory staff. It can also identify gaps in reagent supply. And the laboratory might consider increasing storage capacity for essential reagents. Apologies. So the implications of results on the national level. If the search capacity might be insufficient for a pandemic, is that the national authority might consider to develop a program to improve diagnostic capacity. And this can be a national program. It can, when there are gaps identified in the awareness of safe and secure laboratory practices, the national authority might consider developing material or providing assistance to fill that gap. So it can be a national training program with a conference, or it can be other forms of support. Identify gaps in reagent supply. So then a national authority might consider improving custom clearance for laboratory reagents and port of entry, or decide to have a national procurement of essential reagents. And what is also possible is that all diagnostic laboratories calculate search capacity and inform the Ministry of Health or the national authority. And then the national authority also has an overview of how much each lab can test, and therefore can enable a rapid response for upcoming public health emergencies, because they are aware of how they can distribute the samples to the different labs without requesting more of the labs than they can achieve. So this is my presentation on the aspects of the tool, why we developed it, and what the implication of the results might be. I will now give the word to my colleague Iris Vennis, who will give you a live demonstration of the tool. Over to you, Iris.
Yes, thank you, Joris. I'll start sharing my screen. I hope it is visible for everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I will give a live demonstration of our search capacity assessment tool. As Joris mentioned, this is an Excel-based tool. And as you can see here, this is a spreadsheet. It contains of 4 sheets: the cover page, the questions, the summary of the results of the questions, and the 24-hour search calculator. And we start today on the cover page, and the page that I'm at the moment. For demonstration purposes, the text is now in light gray, but in the real tool, it will be easily to read. So the search capacity assessment tool introduction starts with some information, some background on the tool. It explains that it consists of 2 parts, the questions part and the calculator part. Well, if I scroll a little bit down, we see a box with information about the questions part. And here again, there's some information about how to score it and the different areas of the questions. I will go into detail about that a little bit later. But what I would like to explain is here, it has some information about the expertise that is needed to fill out the questions. As Joris already explained, there might be different expertises or responsibilities, people working in a lab that should be consulted to fill out the questions. So for example, you would like some expertise on the laboratory budget or the staff management. The assessor of the tool might not have all this expertise. So it's possible to assign this expertise to a person. So here in yellow, we have highlighted the boxes where you can enter your own information. So if I want to assign, for example, Joris Sprokholt to the laboratory budget, I can enter here the box and type in Joris Sprokholt. And here you can see the relevant questions for Joris Sprokholt. So for all of these expertises and responsibilities, you can fill out names, and it's easy to see to which questions they should look. We will have a look at those questions, and we can do that in two different ways. So I'm scrolling a little bit up now again. And here in blue, underlined, I can click on the word questions. And as you can see, we now navigate to a different sheet, the question sheet. And of course, it's also possible to navigate by clicking on the sheet. So in the question sheet, it starts with a short introduction about how to fill in the questions. Start with the user guidelines. So the tool consists of 7 different areas: the laboratory profile, equipment and technology, staff and workforce management, reagents and logistics, quality assurance, test validation, and reporting and data management. So I'm scrolling a little bit down now, and you can see in the first color, so every area has its own color, it says the area laboratory structure and budget. Each area also has a subcategory, for example here, emergency budget, organization, or infrastructure. And then there's the question number. There are a range of topics that there are questions about, and there are 4 corresponding answers, from 4, 3, 2, and 1, 4 presenting the highest score, and 1 the lowest score. And then there's a score box, and again, in yellow highlighted are the boxes where you can enter your values. And then a little bit to the right, there are notes for the assessor. So this gives more information for the assessor how to score the question. For each question, it is possible to give a score between 4 and 1 or not applicable. Well, if we have a look at the questions for the first area, I would like, together with you, look at the question in the area of laboratory structure and budget, in the subcategory infrastructure. Then question number 4 reads, storage space to intake, process and store at appropriate temperatures, laboratory supplies, reagents, consumables, and equipment, and storage capacity. What answer would reflect your laboratory best? Is that for a score of 4, that adequate space is identified, score of 3, that there is limited space, score of 2, that there's insufficient space, or a score of 1, that no capacity for on-site storage is available? And then there's a note for the assessor. It says the score is determined by the most limiting storage condition. Well, let's answer this question together and see which answer represents our lab the best. And I would like to ask John if he can launch the poll. So you can identify what would you choose for your laboratory? What would fit best to your laboratory? Is that there is no capacity for on-site storage, reflecting a score of 1. There's insufficient space, reflecting the score of 2. There's limited space, reflecting the score of 3, or adequate space, the score of 4. And it's now possible to vote.
Okay, yeah, the votes are coming in, Iris.
Very well. let's see what we will answer. And as you can see, for some of the other questions, I already pre-filled some answers. There's some scores are already in the tool.
So Iris, it's just worth explaining that we've just grayed out the boxes because it makes it easier for you to focus on the main question. But obviously, in the real example, it's black text, so it's clear.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I highlighted this question at the moment, but indeed, in the real tool, everything is with black text.
So I won't ask you. I will be kind to you. I won't ask you what you think it's going to be. So let's see. Let's see what they come up with.
Okay, let's wait a couple of more seconds.
Yeah, we'll give it 2 minutes. We've got another 20 seconds. I think we're probably almost there, and then we'll see what the results will be, and I'll share that with you. It looks quite interesting, actually. I think what it does indicate is that all the questions are valid. There are answers in each section. Okay. I'll stop the poll there and share the results. There we are.
Yes. Thank you, John. Indeed, looking at the results, we see, like John mentioned, answers on every different scoring. So it ranges from laboratory to laboratory if there's either no capacity or adequate space. So here, as most of you answered limited space, we will choose this answer to fill into the tool. So how do you do that? Well, in this score column, which is highlighted in yellow, it's possible to enter your score. You can do this either by filling in the number or using the drop-down menu, which is here. And you can choose for 1, 2, 3, or 4, or not applicable. So here we fill out a score of 2, and it's now displayed. Well, if we scroll a little bit further down in the tool, you see here a lot of questions of the first color for the laboratory structure and budget, but then there are new colors indicating another area. So here, a bit lighter color is the equipment and technology. In orange is the staff and workforce management area. And if I'm scrolling down, I would like to look at another question together, and that's question number 25. In the area of staff and workforce management, in the subcategory of biosafety and biosecurity, it reads, the laboratory should have appropriate levels of biosafety and biosecurity measures of search laboratory space. And again, there are 4 possible scores. For a score of 4, it's appropriate biosafety measures are implemented and appropriate biosecurity measures are implemented, whereas for a score of 1, no biosafety or biosecurity measures are implemented. Again, there's a note for the assessor on how to assess this question, and it says that the measures should be appropriate to national or institutional regulations. So let's do this question all together again. If John can launch poll, yes, thank you. It says, does your laboratory have appropriate levels of biosafety and biosecurity measures for search laboratory space? Is that for a score of 4, appropriate biosafety and biosecurity measures are implemented? Is that score of 3, some biosafety and biosecurity measures are implemented, for example, restricted access? Score of 2, some biosafety measures, but no biosecurity measures are implemented, or a score of 1, no biosafety and biosecurity measures are implemented. And again, it's possible to choose one answer.
And this time I've given the opportunity for the panelists to answer. What I didn't realize up until now is that the panelists couldn't answer the poll questions, but now I've opened it up, so hopefully they'll be able to vote on this one. So we've got quite a few votes coming through, and again, it's a complete mixture, and there are scores in each section. So I think Iris, this is a great indication that we've got the right kind of questions here. So in terms of validation.
Yes. Yeah, and indeed, also for biosafety and biosecurity, it differs from lab to lab how well this is organized, and especially in search capacity, some extra measures might be needed. So it's interesting to see how it differs in our public as well.
Yeah, and I see from the note to the assessor that it needs to be appropriate to national institutional regulations. So we're depending on the national picture as well for the score to some extent.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, we've run for 2 minutes. I think I'll close it now and share the results.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, John. I see indeed, as John already mentioned, again, votes on every different score. But I'm happy to see that most of you say that appropriate biosafety and biosecurity measures are implemented, or at least biosafety measures are implemented, and some efforts are made on biosecurity. And that's very, very great. So let's take the score of 4 to fill in here in the search capacity assessment tool. But this time, instead of using the drop-down menu, I will type in the number. So we had a score of 4. But what if, by example, I press 4 2 times? Would this mess up the assessment tool? Well, if I press enter, I actually get an error message displaying that I cannot enter any other value than 1 to 4 or not applicable. So I retry and enter 4, and this time it works. So as you can see, for all the other questions, I already pre-filled it with answers so that we will have a nice summary of our results. So scrolling a little bit further down, you see there are many more different areas and many more questions. So in total, there are 40 questions. So now it is possible to navigate to the questions summary of results sheet, but it's also possible to go back to the cover page, where if we scroll down, there's also a box with a summary of the questions summary of results. I can again click on this blue underlined text, which will take me to the sheet of the question summary of results. So looking at the results, on the left, we have an overview of the results of all the different areas, but also of the subcategories. And the scores are presented as a percentage compared to the ideal laboratory. And an ideal laboratory would score 4 out of 4 on all the questions, which would mean they would score 100% on all the different areas and all the different subcategories. So we see here in this, again, the same color coding, the different areas and the subcategories and the results. And if I scroll a bit down, you also see the overall search capacity assessment score. And this is graphically displayed in a spider plot, but also going further down, you see the results per category in a bar plot, and also of the total score. It's a nice way to present your results. But on the bottom of the page, it also indicates what are the major gaps in search capacity and what are the major strengths. And here in this case, a major gap is the quality assurance. And if you want to increase your quality assurance for search capacity, you can look back at the questions, see what score you've given the quality assurance, and what do you need to change to get a higher score. So you can use this information also to improve your search capacity.
Joris, I have a quick question. What happens? It comes from from the audience, actually, from the delegates. So, does it mean that the lowest score overall will be 40? And what happens if the assessor chooses non-applicable? How does that affect the scoring?
If the assessor chooses non-applicable, the score will not be. The answer is not calculated within the score. So it doesn't bring it down. However, we do say you should answer as many questions as possible, because if you only answer 1 or 2 questions in an area, it might not reflect the real situation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question. I will now go to the second part of the search capacity assessment tool, which is the 24-hour search calculator. Now I'll navigate now by clicking on the sheet, but again, it's also possible to go to the cover page and click there on the underlined text. The search capacity calculator, again, here's some text in light gray, but in the real tool, it will be easily to read in black. It explains how the tool works. There are a set of questions regarding a normal situation and a set of questions regarding the emergency situation. And before answering these questions, it is important to list the 3 most important equipment used for performing molecular tests. Well, again, I already pre-filled some information. So I entered the Abbott M2000 real-time system machine, biological safety cabinets, and I will here fill in PCR machines. Well, if I scroll down now, there are a set of questions regarding a normal situation, starting with what is the maximum number of molecular tests the laboratory can perform per day? So here you can enter your own number, but for now I will enter 250. Then there are questions about the operating hours of the laboratory and how many hours the staff work per day. I've entered the number already, but by using the arrows up and down, you can change this. Then there are 3 questions about the man hours per day for the pre-analytical phase, the analytical phase, and the post-analytical phase. When you're performing in a normal situation, the maximum amount of tests. Then, as we just fill out above, 3 different types of equipment, the Abbott M2000, the biological safety cabinets, and the PCR machines. It asks the question, how many of those equipments do you have available, and what is the occupation of this equipment on the normal situations? And as you can see, I just entered PCR machines, so PCR machines are here now. But what happens if I enter MagnaPure? Well, you see that here it changes to MagnaPure. So you can enter your own equipment and it will change. Also for the percentages, you can use the arrows up and down to change it by steps of 5%. Going down, there are a set of questions regarding the emergency situation. And those questions are actually very similar. So it says, what are the operating hours? How many hours per day can staff work additionally during emergency operations? But also how many additional man hours would be available to work on pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical phase. It also contains the questions about the equipment. Can you add additionally another Abbott machine or one of the other machines? Or can you increase the occupation of those machines? Well, I pre-filled all the different questions. And when you fill in all this information, you in the end get a maximum number of molecular tests the laboratory can perform per day under emergency operations. And in this case, there are now 1,029 tests a laboratory can perform. But if we change around with these numbers, say for example, it would be possible to add another Abbott real-time system, because sorry, I said the wrong thing. Here we have 1,000, and then the factor limiting the 24 hours search capacity is the Abbott, the M2000 real-time system. Say if we add another, we see that it goes up, but then there's another limiting factor. The MagnaPure is a limiting factor, which is here on the bottom. We indicated that we don't have another MagnaPure, and the maximum occupation is 90%. So it indicates the limiting factor now for your search capacity is the MagnaPure occupation, or you should have an additional MagnaPure. So if I increase the occupation from 90 to 95%, see that the search capacity goes up. But I can also see if it's possible to add another MagnaPure machine. So if I add this, we see that the search capacity goes up and another factor becomes a limiting factor. Now the biological safety cabinets are limiting. However, if I, for example, say I want additional staff working during emergency operations, I already increased it. But what happens if I increase it even more to 13? or 14, we actually see that it doesn't have any influence on the maximum amount of molecular tests, as there's another factor that's limiting the amount of tests that a laboratory can perform during a day. So by entering the information in this calculator, it's possible to give an indication of the molecular tests you can perform in your lab in search capacity, but also what is your limiting factor to increase the search capacity. So that was the demonstration of the tool. If you have any questions, we are happy to take them. But for now, I would like to give the word back to John Jones. Thank you.